Okay, the question if the 1% rule is green government possible revolves around a number of different ideas, concepts that we have to actually first establish. One is obviously who or what is the 1% rule. The 1% we've often suggested are the ruling class, those people who lord over us, whatever. At one stage they were identifiable, we could see them, they rode around in the carriages, they lived in the castles, they were the lords, relatively straightforwardly. These days it's a lot harder to actually be able to say who the 1% actually is. But we have an idea that there is a group of people who somehow have some ability to control us or have some ability to control the levers of the state. This leads us to, and by the way, then there's the 99%, and I'll come back to who or what the 99% might be and what their role perhaps is. Then we come to the requirement of the state, or that the state exists, that is the set of institutions, broadly is the set of institutions that maintain sets of government. This is separate from the nation being, sorry if I sound like a lecturer, it's what I do for a job. The nation being the set of boundaries, the sovereign area, post-Treaty of Westphalia, etc. The state, though, is those sets of institutions, the bodies, all the parliaments, all the different things that go to make up what we would call the modern state. We can trace that back a few hundred years. We can go through the administration, the need for the state. In reality, who needs the state? If we actually look back to the early beginnings of the state, particularly under the Ancien Regime in France, you find it's not actually the 99% that needs the state, it's actually the 1% that needs the state. So it is today. The 1% requires the state. They need it to be able to manage a country, a nation. They need it to manage the people. So the 1% themselves these days, not quite the old lords and ladies. Nonetheless, they are still there as the, if you like, the capitalists or the bodies of capitalism, corporations themselves being as bodies of capitalism. They require a state to manage the affairs and manage the people. So we can see the state as capitalist managers. That includes the people within the state, that is the parliaments, the parliamentarians, the senior public servants, civil servants, etc., as, in essence, managing the state on behalf of the 1%. You can probably see where I'm going with this. Okay? This unfortunately leads to a conclusion we could make that parliamentarians themselves are there as representatives of the 1%. So you can see the conundrum that sits within the questions. If the 1% rule is a green government possible? I wrote down a pithy comment that sprang to mind as I was thinking about what I was going to say today, which was we can perhaps see Parliament as maybe smoothing the pillow of a dying revolution, to paraphrase an old statement. Which is perhaps a little cynical, but nonetheless, I think you start to see the point where I'm getting to. It's like, well, we have these notions of revolution, we have notions of how we can change things, but in fact, the state and parliaments that we are engaged with may be seen as perhaps saying, oh, well, we'll give you a little bit, we'll give you something, we'll keep you engaged. The other side of that, of course, is neoliberals who perhaps don't see the state in quite the same way as managing people, the economy, the nation. Because it is about themselves and about the individual, they perhaps, and indeed this is the reason why you may well have a state, is to be able to manage the neoliberals as much as anyone else. What we see when we have a revolution is, or what we might want from a revolution, is the overthrow of the state, not the replacement simply of the nomenclature, the managers. That would require a period of non-stability or instability, because we all exist with sets of norms and things that we understand about how the world will work, how we will operate, how streets work, how everything works around us is built through a set of norms. We have a set of laws that are legitimate, that we are compliant with. We continue to do things, even if we took away those laws, we may still continue to do particular things, act in particular ways. Therefore, you require a period of instability where there are no norms, everything is in turmoil, in flux. Where do we get with that? Well, we've had a case of this occurring. We've had a couple of cases. The classic, of course, is the Cultural Revolution in China, where to create the new state, you had to completely dispense with the old state. And so you see an end to norms of behaviour, norms of how the state might operate, or norms of how you will interact with any part of the state. Indeed, that the state is now completely transforming. The idea that if this lasts long enough, people will start to develop new norms and new ways of thinking. I'm not entirely convinced that most of us want to see a new, well, maybe some of us do want to see a new cultural revolution, not entirely sure. Greens have a classic pillar of peace and non-violence. This might be counterintuitive when we talk about revolutions, particularly violent revolutions, particularly if we're talking about cultural revolutions. Unfortunately, how are you going to overthrow the state? We might be able to overwhelm the state at some point if the 99%, being 99% of the population, actually overthrew the state. We have some cases, there are cases in history where you can look at it and say actually the 99% did manage to overthrow the state. But I'm not convinced, frankly, that Australia's in that condition at this point. What we might need to be looking at is how not to be just the managers of the capitalist state. Perhaps that's what we need to be arguing about. If we just engage in green government, are we not just simply replicating what's gone before? So how do we change that actual role? We need to be, well, I've got written down here, how different are Greens from Social Democrats? Right? Many people like to look to Sweden and say, wouldn't it be nice if we lived in Swedish social democracy? Ignoring all the different situations, populations, just about everything there is you can think of, but we still look to some sets of ideas there about the role and place of the state in Swedish lives, albeit slowly being unwound, realising that it's actually a very recent phenomena historically, that it's actually quite new. What we have in Australia is equally as new. We talk about ecological sustainability and ecological wisdom, but we're not actually necessarily clear on what they might be and how you might necessarily enact them. So frankly, we'd also have to be clear what that green part of green government was. Lastly, if green is, well, not lastly, I've got pages of the stuff. If green is war by other means, are Greens engaged in some war? Who is it that we're actually fighting, or who is it we're actually combating? Indeed, who is the other? Who is the enemy, as it were? Do we claim to be the enemy of all neoliberals or all the capitalists or all those, or is it certain elements? If politics, this is one of the other great aphorisms, if politics is the art of compromise, what are we prepared to compromise over? I think that's one of the key questions. Where are we prepared to make those compromises? Let's go back to the 1% for a moment, because it's still there in the equation. If we have the 1%, who are the 99%? Are they included in the conversation? It's actually something Natalie said that reminded me about how people view democracy. Are they satisfied with it? Where we have in the UK 50% of the population saying we are not happy with democracy. In Australia, 25% at worst at this point in time are saying they're not happy with the current state of democracy in Australia. They might not like the government, but they're at least moderately happy with the state of democracy. It has, I should add, been much, much higher over time. Nonetheless, still 75%, the bulk of that 99%, are actually relatively comfortable with the kind of democracy we have. If we're not going to manage the state for the 1%, who then are we going to be managing it for? If we're taking on a custodian role, what are the parameters, purposes, principles of that custodianship? Greens have talked about being custodians of the earth. Who are we custodians for? And what are how are we going to, manage that? How are we going to do that in reality? So, we should not think of the Greens as representing the 1%. I don't think that's what we want to think about. But we must be careful to manage the state, or at least how we manage the state, that we don't actually manage it in the interests of capital or the 1%. And I'm not convinced that this can be done within the context of government, that's large G government, as we currently know it. And I'll leave it at that, I think.